Well, welcome back to the Grapple Theory podcast, joined today by a very special guest, one of the legends of the commentating game here in British wrestling, not just British wrestling, but international wrestling. It's Dave Bradshaw. Dave, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. How have you been doing?
Well, thank you. Very, very kind intro. Yeah, I'm doing good. It's feels like the sort of the independent scene in Europe and beyond is kind of back to normal now.
Yeah, I think we can say that, can't we? I think it's tricky to sort of judge the last few years just because it's been such a whirlwind. Like, I don't know about you, but like for me personally, like I have no concept of time anymore. Like I don't know how long ago 2020 was at this stage.
No, yeah, well, it feels like there's two different eras to our lives now. It's like, do you remember the before days, and the after days? And
yeah.
And I'm like, people ask me like about things I did in wrestling in like 2017. I'm like, oh. You're asking me about a previous age.
Yeah. The past life.
Yeah. So it does feel a long time ago now.
No, I get it. Like some people we'll talk to people on the podcast and they'll talk about matches they had in like you say 2017, 2018, 2019. I'll be like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. And then I remember that it's actually a long time ago.
Yeah. Time flies by, doesn't it? I was seeing today someone put on Facebook or on social media or something that it was 5 years today since there was a picture of them performing at Progress at Wembley.
Yes, Progress Wembley was, I think it was today or yesterday or something, wasn't it? It was 5 years since Progress, which seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, I mean I wasn't part of that, but obviously I remember it, and I was like, oh my god, like that's that. Yeah, in a way that feels like it's gone really quickly, and in another way it's like, yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, but you're right though. You get the sense that it's healing now because of the fact, like, obviously it's been 5 years since Progress did Wembley, and we're just coming off the back of Rev Pro doing the Copper Box.
Yep.
Like, and like packing out as well, and so it seemed like wrestling's healing in that way, where the big companies can still put on these massive events and sell them out well.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'm sure one of the things we might talk about is how the sort of the entrance of WWE into the UK market kind of changed the indie scene around that time. But I suppose what's happened recently is, with the merger with WWE and Endeavour, and that kind of put the plans for WWE or NXT Europe on hold. And a lot of the guys who we maybe expected and maybe still expect will be part of that have at least temporarily been free agents. So they've been able to compete back on the indie scene. So we've had a sort of an influx of established talent. Obviously, there's the fact that we've got a great sort of conveyor belt of new talent coming through anyway. So it's not like we didn't need those guys to come back, but it's nice that they have. And I think it's this. I always thought, even in 2018-19, when people were saying, "Oh well, NXT UK is going to take all the top talent away from the UK indies, and it's going to be the death of the British scene." I'm like, nah. I mean, it all seemed a little bit exaggerated. We're a strong enough scene that we were going to, do okay. Obviously, then there was a pandemic, and that changed things. But no, I feel like the scene is healthy. It's not quite in the boom period it was in 2016 or 17, but I've been doing this 15 years, and I've seen it a lot worse than it is now. So
I was gonna say it's a weird one, isn't it? Because like there was a few things you mentioned there that we will get onto, but like I think it's tough to judge because a lot of people judge, don't they? Like, oh, it's not the boom period it was, like you say, 2017, 2018, when like British Strong Style were at the top of all the cards. You know what I mean? And it was really going crazy. But like, I think it's tricky to judge it next to that because, like you say, since then we've had COVID. We've had speaking out. We're in a cost of living crisis. Like, you can't compare it to that when none of that was happening.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you take it in the context of all those things you just said, I actually think the scene's doing remarkably well, considering everything it's had to endure. And yeah, I mean, if you're going to compare it, it feels like a kind of a high bar to compare it to, right? To the absolute strongest it's ever been since, certainly since the days when World of Sport was on television 30 or 40 years ago. Yeah, 2016, 2017 high watermark was great. And we might not be there, but the scene is, it's all right. It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's going well. And like you say, like with NXT UK sign, we spoke to, especially when we started, because we started in 2021, so just coming out of the pandemic. And obviously all those wrestlers who had left were then contracted to NXT UK and a few more during COVID had left because they were offered contracts, and you'd be a fool not to take them when there's no other wrestling happening. But a lot of the stuff we spoke to with people like that was the fact that the fan, what I gathered from it generally is that the fans seemed to think it was like the end of British wrestling, but the wrestlers we spoke to were like, well, and like you see where they come from, completely agree this end as well, is the fact that if NXT UK hadn't happened, we might still have just those same guys at the top of the card every week. Whereas now you've got all these names who came through during the pandemic, or after the pandemic, sorry, who have had that spot on the card now, who've got those top spots because all those other big names left and those spots were there to fill.
Yeah, I mean, I think, ultimately talent rises, right? So I think, I think a lot of these guys would have got there eventually. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly the case that some of these people would have been accelerated in terms of their position up the card quicker than they otherwise might have been. And there's obviously pros and cons to that. But yeah, it's not necessarily negative that these people got that experience earlier on in their careers. Because, I mean, one of the things I think you'll notice now is that, not solely because of that, but maybe it's a contributing factor, is that like a lot of the really good young guys on the European scene are like absurdly young.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
They've had 18, 19, 20. It's actually kind of mad, when you sort of think about what I was doing at 18. Could barely roll out of bed and play on my PlayStation. And some of these guys are doing, swanton 450 splashes and stuff. It's mental.
Oh, that's what we get all the time. It's always about, like, we get so many people on here talking about how old they feel now because, again, like you say, you got the likes of, like, CPF and Leon Slater and, like, Oku, who's still, like, quite young but has been doing it for so long, and, like, Lycos 2, all those guys coming through who are just insanely good. Like, I don't even know how it's possible for them to be that good. Like, Lycos 2 especially, he's another guy, like, who's been around for ages, and yet he, like, hasn't aged at all.
Yeah, I know. He still looks, I hope you won't mind me saying, he still looks like he's, 12, 15 years old. Well, not that, I guess actually he doesn't, because most people don't get to see him.
No, exactly. No. Kayfabe, yes, of course. No one knows.
No, sorry, kayfabe. Yeah, but, he's, I mean, I've known him for a long time. And I've always thought he's a good guy, because he's got a really good attitude. He's had that since he was young. Like, I remember there was one show I was on where, like, someone didn't arrive because of travel problems and they needed him to do double duty or something. And even though he was super inexperienced at the time, he was totally up for doing it. He's one of those people who's definitely got the right attitude. And he would have to be, because, knowing actual Kid Lycos and the rest of the CCK guys who kind of took him under their wing, they wouldn't have done that if they thought he was, an idiot. So I'm pleased to see he's doing well now, because he's a good kid.
Yeah, and while we're shouting out people, I think, again, mentioned him before, but got to shout out Leon Slater, because I can't remember a rise as fast as Leon Slater has had for a long time.
Yeah, it's difficult, because you try not to get, like, too far ahead of yourself with Leon, because you kind of think, you watch him, and, he just turned 19 this week. And you I only know him a little bit. Like, I've commentated on him a few times now. I know Liam Slater quite well, who trained him, but there's this, like, you think he can't be that good. He can't be that good at that age. And, like, it's not just, he can do all those sort of incredible acrobatic moves we're talking about, but his persona in the ring, the way he carries himself like a superstar. And he's literally only just turned 19. I mean, how good is he going to be when he's 22, 23? I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. I
just don't even know, as well as the athletic side, I don't understand how like, someone that age can have that level of confidence as well. Because I know I didn't at 19, do you know what I mean? I'm like, how is he so good at it?
Yeah. I remember when I was 19, I showed up to do wrestling training for the first. I mean, I was never in kind of athletic shape, but, back in, like, the early 2000s, I was like, I'm going to train to be a wrestler, and they were like, can you do, like, a forward roll? And I'm like, I mean, kind of.
It's just incredible. And then, like, again, I think Leon was one of those guys as well, like, because you mentioned Liam as well, and we had Liam Slater on the podcast and spoke to him, and I was like, for people who don't know, like, the northern scene as such, like, who are mainly based down south, like, who are the names they should be looking out for? And he said Leon Slater's going to be a megastar. Like, he said that, and then Leon... It was just before Leon got his Progress debut, and then Leon got booked on Progress, and the rest is history, as they say. Like Liam knew from the start that, that Leon was going to be...
Yeah, there's something about, like... Sometimes I think... you'd have to ask someone like Liam, but like I think that sometimes like when someone's training someone, they get a sense very early that this kid's different. You know what I mean? And I think like Leon, just the way he moves in the ring, everything about his sort of persona, quite aside from all the high spots he can do, is you do kind of partly so that you don't put too much pressure on him, but partly because you don't want to say something to preach not to be right later. So you don't want to go ahead and start using all these superlatives about how great he could be and how far he's going to go. But like, equally, there is very obviously that potential there. If he can keep his, ironically, if he can keep his feet on the ground, then he could go. Yeah, there's a career ahead for him.
Absolutely. I'm just curious as to if you've had anyone like that from your vantage point in the commentary booth. If you've ever like commentated on someone where you've sort of like who maybe is like at the beginning of their journey, where you've sort of known instantly that they were going to be something.
Yeah, I mean Leon is one of the biggest examples of that. I think if I go back, like I remember when Nathan Cruz was really young, and thinking, wow, this kid's, especially for what the UK scene was in, say, kid, I wasn't that old then, do you know what I mean? But like 2008, I'm talking 2009, he was just coming through, and there was this whole sort of like, he was obviously, mainly in NGW, sort of home promotion up in Hull, and there was, he was one of those guys where you just, there's something here. Another one is who I didn't actually really commentate on, but like back then I used to write some of the British wrestling stuff for Fighting Spirit magazine, FSM, which is no longer around. But we used to do this this one-page feature every month called One to Watch, which was, so I keep an eye on this guy coming up through the indie scene. So I was sort of scouring through some of the promotions that I didn't commentate for, trying to find some people. And the guys up in PBW in Scotland sent me some footage of this kid called Noam Dar.
Who's that? It doesn't ring a bell, no.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to like put myself over as someone who immediately spots talent. There's plenty of people who I've completely brushed over in terms of thinking that they were going to be something and then they turn out to be, megastars. But Noam was one where I saw this in his case. I only saw some video footage and stuff, and then spoke to him on the phone to interview him. But he was one where I was like, that some people just have like it. Do you know what I mean? Like they just have that sort of that star power from very early on, and you do just intuitively. I think sometimes when you meet some of those guys or see them in action, kind of feel like, that felt like I've just seen someone who's gonna go somewhere.
Yeah.
And that, so there's been a few.
Yeah, for sure. I think like shout out while we're here as well, because like the one that I'm not in any sort of vantage point. I'm just a fan mainly. You know what I mean? But like the one that I've looked at as well as Leon, like come through the last year, and she's injured at the minute, so all the best to her in her recovery, is Rain Leverkusen.
Oh, incredible!
And you're like, holy shit, like, because she's only been like in it a year or something. And she's just like, no one should be that good only a year in.
Yeah, and again, not just in ring, but like the persona. I love the there's almost a sort of an 80s throwback thing to Rain, and also another person who's, lovely person, great attitude. Someone who, she's another one in that recent crop. And that's one of the reasons I say that the scene is so good, because I could name you, we talked about 2 or 3 of them, but like, I could go down a list of 10, 15.
Oh, we could be here for an hour talking about just the ones who are that good coming through.
Yeah, which obviously is the sign of a healthy scene. So
absolutely. And I'm curious as well, just like because of again your vantage point from commentary rather than necessarily being in the locker room as such. I think obviously like naturally with everything that happened in 2020 with COVID and speaking out, there's been a lot of change in the scene as well, not just from people leaving but other factors as well. Has it felt like that for you? Have you noticed a change in the scene in terms of the atmosphere around shows and how people act and react now, that sort of thing?
What do you mean in terms of how fans react, or in terms of how?
No, it's sort of like in terms of like that as well, but also like, you know, how shows are being run and how things have sort of changed in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there's a professionalization, not in all cases, but in some cases, in terms of like the sort of processes that have, like Riot Cabaret is a good example, right? So for those who don't know, there are relatively new promotion started last year in London. They run bi-monthly in Clapham, the Clapham Grand, which is a great venue, and I commentate for them. But they were planning to start up in early 2020. The first conversations I had with them were just before the pandemic. And, you know, I liked James and Sean, who were running it. They seemed like really cool guys, so I was really on board with helping them. But there were some things they were doing in terms of like processes they were putting in place that seemed, not that they were bad, they were good ideas, but they were like, it almost, in that sort of 2020 mindset, almost seemed like, this is great, I'm not sure you need to do that. You know, which was like things like a safeguarding policy, or like, having a union representative from Equity there at every show, sort of having much more sort of, because well, James's background is in theatre, and Sean's is in radio, and it's like much more sort of professionalizing it in the way that that those industries do. Yeah. And I remember thinking, let me rephrase that. It's not that I thought they weren't necessary. It was just that I thought like, it's like
not many places did them. You don't think about it being a necessity until something like what happened in 2020 happens.
Right, and it's not like you thought, oh well, nowhere needs a safeguarding policy. Everywhere should have a safeguarding policy, but so it wasn't like unnecessary in that sense. But it was sort of in the sense of
we didn't all think there was so much bad going on that it needed to happen, whereas clearly it needed to happen.
Yeah, and also just on a more just on a practical level, you know, in terms of like, what do you need to get up and running? Like, you know, for people to be happy to come and see you, and for talent to be happy to be booked with you. It seemed like they were going above and beyond, but actually it was incredibly, you know, they showed great foresight there, because as we learned later that year, it was something that British wrestling really was kind of behind the curve on, and now they are leading the way still on in terms of that, but they're not the only promotion doing that stuff now, because a lot of places thankfully have sort of learned some important lessons from 2020.
As we should have. And it's good to see the scene changing that way. But like you say, like, shout out to Riot Cabaret, because again, like, I'm a regular there myself, and it's like, it's such a fun night. Like, when they first started, I sort of compared them. I don't know if you ever commentated for them or if you ever worked there, but my old regular where I used to live was Riptide in Brighton.
Yeah, I know them by reputation. I never worked for them.
But that was always great fun. And when Riot first started, I was like, oh shit, this is like Riptide. Like, it felt like that fun night out where you didn't necessarily have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy it. Yeah. And that's how, and like, now I wouldn't compare the two. Now I think Riot have done their own thing. They're doing it brilliantly. But like, it's very rare, I think, and this is no disrespect to any other promotion running, because there's so many great promotions in the country, but like, it's very rare to find a promotion like that can be that much of a good time for, like, I've taken friends as well, like, for people who think they don't like wrestling, like, who go in there fully expecting to not really enjoy it.
Yeah, and also I think that's another sign of, again, not to harp on it, but like of a healthy scene, because actually it's a bit like how you know, when Progress was first starting up in 2012-13, like they were attracting that kind of cool Islington, Camden crowd who weren't necessarily, and some were big indie wrestling fans, but they were also attracting a crowd who were not like automatic wrestling fans, but were willing to give it a go as a sort of novel form of entertainment kind of thing. Same with what you get the sense Riot Cabaret attracts that kind of audience, I think. I was recently at Hustle, had a show, they do monthly or bi-monthly in Hackney Whip, which is near where my office is now. So I was there. They went on Tuesday nights as well, and they had a very sort of non-traditional crowd in terms of what you would stereotypically think of as wrestling fans.
Yeah,
it was very sort of Hackney Wick's quite hipstery, now, and it was kind of that sort of crowd, and you're like, oh, okay, like there's this kind of crowd prepared to give wrestling a go on a Tuesday night, So I was like, okay, that's and the show was great, and I'm sure they'll come back for more. So yeah, if you're finding that you're able to attract those kind of audiences, then you're doing something right.
Yeah, and again, like I'm curious to get your vantage point on it, because for me, like the standout for both those promotions and a few others as well, are like across the country, like North springs to mind immediately. But for me, a part of that hook, a part of what makes that atmosphere the way it is the venue. Because the venue lends itself so perfectly to what those promotions are trying to achieve or trying to embody.
Yeah, North's had that a while, actually, because they, again, I don't work, well, actually, I just commentated a North show because they collaborated with WXW in Germany, who I do commentate for. But I'd never, prior to the past month, never commentated a North show, but I've seen footage, obviously, and I remember when we were doing, I was involved in WCPW, What Culture Pro Wrestling, which had its sort of brief boom period in 2016, 17, and like North was sort of almost the like rebel Newcastle promotion that didn't have the budget that What Culture had, and it was like this kind of upstart. WCPW was an upstart, but it was an upstart with money.
Yeah.
Whereas North was sort of. I remember, for example, back at some point back then, they had Jack the Jobber, who's was now on Cultaholic, but he was a What Culture personality. Like, and in What Culture, he was a babyface on their YouTube channels, but he would go to North because he was from WCPW. Like, and I think he was managing Liam.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
And he was sort of just naturally, because he's from the big boys up the road kind of thing. He was like a heel, which was interesting. So they've always had that sort of rebel spirit, I think, North.
Yeah, and again, we had Andy from North on like a while ago, and he was talking about how, like, again, it was that sort of like rebel underground thing, but he never considered them like, it wasn't like a rivalry thing. It wasn't like, oh, let's try and one up WCPW. It was very much a like, let's just give wrestling fans in Newcastle something a little different. And it's cool, like, from what you said, because I totally forgot about that, but it's cool that like that Jack like was cool getting involved in that, like almost crossing that divide and showing like, no, it's just wrestling, like we're all just here for good wrestling.
I mean, it was never like, I don't think it was ever like a heated feud between the two, not in reality, was it? But like, it's smart to play into that, because if you've got that hardcore North fan base who want to sort of be different to the other game in town, then great, play into that.
Yeah. Like it's just key. Like it's crazy how I hadn't really considered it much until I started like regularly going to indie shows, which was again like just before the pandemic, 2018, and I was like, a venue lends itself so much to what a promotion is. Like if you could be a great promotion, but if you pick the wrong venue, it just doesn't have that feel. Like and like going back to what you said about like Riot as well, like it just has that feel, right? If like Riot seems like a party night out, and the Clapham Grand is a party venue. And so it just blends so seamlessly. And
I mean, the last two shows we've done with Riot have been on Fridays, because one was the start of Money in the Bank weekend and then All In weekend. But like Hustle, they've been generally running on Tuesdays, and they still, even a Tuesday in Clapham can get a good crowd.
Yeah.
Now they've been running on Fridays, the crowd been even bigger. They started having to fill up the upper balcony kind of area, which had been empty before. But yeah, it's a wild crowd. It's so much fun, right? And they know they know their audience, Riot Cabaret guys as well. Like, they've done that one show famously recently. They did a 90s rumble, because they know it's that kind of, a lot of their audience is of the age, 30s or whatever, that are going to be nostalgic for the 90s, and they had actual Mr Blobby.
Yeah, great moment. What a moment.
Like, I missed it. That was the one Riot Cabaret show I've missed because I contracted COVID.
Oh, gutting.
I didn't even know. So I didn't know that Mr Blobby was going to be on it. So I was like, I text James or Sean, I can't remember. That morning a screenshot of my COVID test going, bad news, guys. So they got in Andy Shepherd, who was NXT UK. So he kindly filled in at short notice, but like. I was just at home feeling sorry for myself because I wasn't even feeling that ill, just a bit cold, and I was like, oh man, I wonder what's happening at Riot Cabaret. I wish I was there.
And then you see Twitter and you're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, and all these photos of all the wrestlers backstage having selfies with Mr Blobby. I was like, this is awful.
Yeah, no, that was a great. They, like you say, they're doing great. We'll get on to some other promotions as well. I feel like we've been on Riot for a while, but they are doing so great. And again, I feel like, again, not necessarily underrated, but I feel like they had one of the shows of All In Weekend. When you consider how many promotions were running, I went to that show and I think that was easily in the top 3 shows of the weekend. Just purely based on what I experienced and what I heard from others about other shows. But I went to 5 shows that weekend and it was easily one of the best.
Yeah, they definitely. Yeah, I'm biased because I work for them. They've got something really good and it's growing and the audience is bigger every single time and it's just great.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got another show obviously in October, and actually it's convenient because while I've got you here I'm going to put you on the spot a bit because Riot Cabaret need a new champion, and I'm going to ask you who you think that new champion is going to be. Who do you think end of October at the Halloween show is going to stake their claim for that belt?
See, I can tell you who I don't want it to be. I think we all don't want it to be.
It's anyone but, right? That's the hashtag,
yeah. Please not Spike Trivet. I think the entire audience shares that sentiment because he is. Can I swear?
Anything goes here. You're all good.
I mean, he's such a wanker.
Yeah.
He just. He loves it. He relishes in it. But no. I mean, I think. But sadly, for all of us. He might be the favourite. I remember him promising because he was injured he wasn't medically cleared to compete on the first Riot show, and he got in the ring and they were going to crown their first champion that night, and he said unfortunately I can't be the first champion, but I guarantee you I'll be the second. I mean, he wasn't the second, but he might be the third.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
no, it is the old anyone but Spike, right? It's been banded around a lot over BritWres over the last few years, but it very clearly is the case.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like it. There's a few. I mean, it'd be great to see TK Cooper get it.
Yeah.
It would be great to see Michael Oku get it. Both of them very capable. I don't know.
Both had great years as well. I remember Riot was good. That match overall in weekend they had Sunshine Machine had with Nico and Jay Joshua.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the matches of the whole weekend, AEW included. I thought that was a phenomenal match. And it takes us back to again, especially for myself, someone who watched them sort of forming and making their way up the mid card, obviously escape the mid card now, but in 2018, 2019, and to see how much they've improved, both as a tag team and individually, even Riot aside, no matter where they are, they've just worked so hard and become so good.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to put Sunshine Machine now in the top, 3 tag teams maybe
in the country. Yeah, in the country. Yeah, I would say.
Which is no mean feat because there's plenty of good tag team wrestling going on as well. So I mean, they're such nice guys. It's not a gimmick. Do you know what I mean?
Oh no, they're just the nicest lads ever.
They are 2 of the nicest people. Yeah. So, good on them.
Absolutely, and of course, you don't just work Riot. You work all over the country. You work all over Europe as well. I mean, you mentioned WXW there. I mean, again, one of the biggest indie promotions in the world. I would say, in my mind, top 3 in Europe easily, maybe top 2. Again, it's just such a phenomenal place to watch wrestling and the talent they bring through as well from their academy. Essentially, I don't want to say fueling the rest of Europe, but you see the talent that they bring through that then go on to wrestle in the UK, in America, all over the world. It's just remarkable the talent pool they have there.
Yeah. Again, it's like people spend a lot of time rightly talking about the British scene when they're talking about European wrestling, but the German scene and WXW leading the way on that is stunning. I mean, I've worked for them. I've worked for WXW a couple of years now, so two and a half, like since the start of 2021, I think, which was obviously slap bang in the pandemic era. They needed they wanted a new English commentator for the stuff they were doing behind closed doors. So the first 20 or 30 shows I commentated for WXW were in empty. I wasn't there. Obviously, I did it in post production, but like it's empty arena shows, which was weird. But yeah, they're like there's nothing quite like going to one of WXW's big weekends. So like I've been fortunate that they've brought me over for 16 Carat Gold, which is their big 16-man knockout tour, 16-person knockout tournament. Sort of every March. It's kind of like their WrestleMania weekend. I'd
equate to that.
Yeah, and it goes on for 3 days. And there's maybe 6 shows over 3 days, like an afternoon and an evening show each day. And it's just big. The Turbine Haller in Oberhausen is this big old venue, big warehouse type place, such good acoustics, great atmosphere. They've got one of the best video teams in the world, indie wrestling certainly, like big video walls and everything, and you just kind of like it. But it sounds really cheesy, but it is the fans there that make it, because there's this festival atmosphere. Like they're even in the sort of you get there at noon each day or whatever, even earlier sometimes, depends when the first show of the day is. And there's already fans in the car park. They're tailgating, like they're drinking and they're sort of singing songs and they're excited to be there. And then there's this sort of most of the talent stays in the same hotel, which is just down the street, 5-10 minute walk from the venue. And some of the fans come along. It's not in like an intrusive way, but like because there's the hotel there. They keep the bar open and for the wrestling crew till 4 a.m. sometimes. And there's sort of almost like a post-show party on all 3 nights. And it's just you get back from it, and I'm like, sometimes you're like, I got paid to do that. And it feels like you've been on a 3-day holiday.
Yeah. You're like, hi, I would have done it for free. But
yeah, no, don't tell them that. Jesus. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a very sometimes you get to the adrenaline, the sort of happiness and adrenaline from some of these big shows you do when you feel like you're at something special, like a 16 Carat weekend. Like you get back, I remember this year getting back exhausted, like on the Monday or Tuesday morning, whatever it was, after this weekend, like, and just being and a little bit hungover, but also being like just chuckling to myself in the taxi back from the airport, being like, I can't believe this is my job. Like this, it's so good.
No, awesome, love it, absolutely. And you talk about, again, like I'm curious in terms of like your career in commentary, like. I know you've spoken like a few times, like, and written about a few times about like how you sort of like came through and got into it and stuff like that. But I want to know, like, is there like a specific moment where, like, because I ask wrestlers this as well, and it's something I'm really curious about. Is there like a specific moment where everything like clicked for you and you were like, okay, like I've got this now, like, because I know obviously again with wrestlers, and I'm sure it's the same with commentary, and we've spoken to a while ago. I actually spoke to another commentator down here. I don't know how familiar you are with him, Dean Ias.
Oh, Dean is the Yoda to my...
Oh, is he? Okay. Oh, he didn't mention that when we spoke. But, like, yeah, Dean's great. He's been in it for so long. And, like, I'm just really curious as, like, to that sort of moment. So, like he said, it takes a few shows to sort of get your rhythm and get into what you're doing. Like, was there a specific show or a specific match you remember where, like, everything clicked for you and you were like, okay, like, I've got this now. I'm in this.
I can't think of one individual moment, but I do remember when it started. Like it was like, one of those roller coasters that fires you off at 100 miles per hour rather than starting slowly. That was how my commentary career started, because it started. It was like 2008. I'd done student radio and stuff at uni, and I kind of was back in London, and I wanted to do something where I could continue to talk into a microphone. And I was like, oh wait, wrestling, why don't I try and be a commentator? And so I emailed like sort of one of the local London promotions in those days, which was IPW UK, who were running in Kent, Bromley sort of area, and said, you need a commentator. Not yet, not at the moment, but come down to some shows and get to know people. So I did. So I went there for 4 or 5 months, and then suddenly in August, I started going in May or something, and then in August they were like, "Do you want? Oh, we might have a vacancy coming up. Do you want to have an audition?" And they auditioned 4 or 5 guys just in a studio in post production one day, and I got it. And then it was, I did their next show, which was just a relatively small monthly indie show. There's like September show, and then 2 days after, and I remember at that show someone saying to me like afterwards, like, "Oh man, you're good, you're a talent," and it was just a passing comment. I can't remember who it was who said it, but it was like, but it means the world to you. You know what I mean? When you're new and you're nervous, and you're in a wrestling locker room for the first time, and you have to do all that shaking everyone's hand stuff and all that kind of, I didn't piss anyone off, did I? Or for someone to just say, "Man, you did a good job," means a lot. And then 2 days later, I got a call saying from Len Davies, who sadly is no longer with us, but he was the guy who ran production for IPW UK back then, and he said he was like, "I'm doing a weekend's worth of shows this coming weekend in Wolverhampton. Do you want to come?" And it was a weekend of shows that was co-promoted by Trent Seven, a young Trent Seven, and they were flying over like 10 Ring of Honor guys, and so on my second weekend in the business, I suddenly found myself commentating on Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness and Austin Aries and the Briscoes and all these people, and and then we're going out on a night out in Wolverhampton with all drinking. Like Roderick Strong was giving me like chops in a bar in Wolverhampton, and I'd been in the business like 7 days, and you're just like, okay, it's kind of like, it's like
a what the fuck moment. You're like, what is happening? Like, what have I got myself into here?
Yeah, you're sort of like, you kind of go from you're trying to crack into this what you consider at the time to be this very tricky small industry to try and get into, and then suddenly when that door did open, within a week or two, you're and then the following month I met Ric Flair, and then you're just like, okay, this is something's going on.
But it was during those chops from Roddy Strong that you realised you'd made it. You were like, I'm in it.
It's during those chops that you realise how much chops hurt.
Yes.
Because I think when you watch them on TV, they're one of those things that you think, oh, well, they're kind of hitting with an open hand. Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
No, it rocks your soul.
There is nothing. I think there may be something. There are few things more satisfying in professional wrestling than when you're watching from the stands and a chop hits and that sound it makes, and you just know that it hurt. How much it hurt based on the sound.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't the first job I had. In my first week or two, I remember I was in a fish and chip shop after a show with Dean Ayers and with Steve Linsky, who's has been one of the top referees in the country, among many other things, over the past couple of decades. And Steve used to be a wrestler. He was a big guy back then as well. And I said to I said, "Oh, give us a chop, Steve." And I'd never taken one. And he just goes, "Yeah, all right, we'll put your chest out." So I was, "Yeah, all right." And he just cranks up and he smashed and I almost just collapsed to the floor.
You feel it, don't you? You feel the air leave you.
Oh my God, it's just So that's the one thing you want to do when you get one of those non-fans who sort of wants to make a big thing about wrestling's fake. It's like, okay, well, open up your chest.
Yeah, yeah. It's that one moment. I don't know if you can relate, but for me, it's like that one moment where you when you land weirdly and bruise your I'm not talking about just wrestling here, just generally, where you land weirdly and bruise your coccyx, and there's that brief second where you're fairly sure you'll never be able to take a breath in again.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, and then you sort of, you get kind of stars in your eyes, and then you're a bit like, a few moments later, you're like, all right, I'm still alive. And then you remember to start breathing again. And then you promise that you'll never ask another wrestler to give you a chop.
Absolutely. That's a great moment. That's a great moment to know you made it, though. Like, Roddy Strong giving you chops. But that's pretty cool. Like, that's a cool, like you say, a very fast rise to be thrown into it. Like, that's almost like, again, the in-ring equivalent of being thrown in the deep end. Like...
Yeah. And actually, I remember, do you know what, that second weekend was the first time as well that I ever saw, because for whatever reason, my first weekend I didn't, but the first time I ever saw two wrestlers planning a match. Which is a bit like, obviously, you kind of know, but like, it's still a bit like finally having it confirmed to you that Santa Claus isn't real.
Yeah.
But now I look back on it, and I'm like, actually, that moment's cool, because it was Kenny Omega and El Generico, Sami Zayn, like, who were both still in the indies then. So it was like, oh, actually, when I think back at that moment now, I'm like, those are two...
Who would know those names now? No one knows those names.
Yeah,
who are they? What?
Two, like, global megastars that I just sort of like, hi. Like, you know, I was literally in the room, there was like all these tiny little rooms backstage at the Wolverhampton Civic Hall. And I just like, because you're still quite shy because you're new, like, I just like slid into a room where I found an empty chair and I was just putting my suit on. And then these two wrestlers, super polite, oh, can we get changed? I'm like, yeah, come in. And I'm just sort of, doing my tie as they're talking through their match. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. I've never seen this before. And now I look back at it now, I'm like, oh.
You're like, holy shit.
Yeah, wow. It was, okay. Like,
yeah, one of those moments you don't fully appreciate in the moment, but you look back on it and you're like, shit, that was a big moment.
Yeah. And that's what's funny, though, is like, once you're in the business, is that, like, it is quite a small industry, and so, like, I'm not saying, you become best mates with everyone who you later see on TV, but you do, like, most of us who've been in it for a while have at least some kind of stories like that, where it's like, I did a show with so-and-so before they main evented WrestleMania 5 years later, or whatever. It is one of those industries where it's like, you can end up with some pretty cool stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But sort of like going back to what we spoke about with WXW, like, it's a small industry, but you can see it's growing. You can see it's expanding based on like the reach that it has now, and the fact that like it's like, again, like for yourself getting these like European bookings when like you go back 10 years and like there were a lot fewer European promotions, like mainland Europe, and like you would very rarely need them to get English commentary because there's no way anyone in England would be watching them. But like, again, like for you that must be a moment of like, oh shit, this is cool, because like those companies now want English promotion, like English commentary, because they're getting the viewers over here, so they want to generate that.
Yeah, that's definitely a big change, because I mean, obviously the English scene, again, it wasn't half as good as it is now in 2008, but the English scene's always been there. The German scene has always been there, but like, but yeah, you look at places like Hungary, like where I work for Passion Pro, who are a great promotion there. There's Belgium, I've got Bodies Oil Wrestling, who I work for. Like France and Spain and Italy have got promotions in a way they didn't really have. I remember when when A-Kid was coming up, I got to know him because he did What Culture, and like his White Wolf Wrestling, right? W in Madrid was like. He was telling, I had quite a few long car rides with him because I used to give him a lift from London to Newcastle for those What Culture shows. We would talk, and he was like, there wasn't really anywhere in Spain to learn to be a pro wrestler, like in the early 2010s. And so like him and his friends and whoever was involved in White Wolf had to sort of start a training school and turn it into a promotion to give themselves a platform to perform on. And like, as small as the British scene is relative to some things, like you look at that and you think, oh wow, we do have it pretty lucky compared to some pretty nearby countries that really didn't have any kind of scene to build on. But that is changing because, like I say, Belgium, France, Italy, Poland, done a show for them for PTW in Poland last year. There's all sorts like coming through, like and now there's, if you were a visiting wrestler, let's say you're an American, comes to do a European tour, like you could get, if you're good enough, you could get work in 10, 12 different European countries, whereas previously, to get beyond England and Germany would have been quite tricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great.
No, absolutely, which is awesome as well. I was going to say, like, I mean, I know you've again spoken about and written about a couple in the past, but like, do you have any sort of like, as well? We've talked about a lot of good, but are there any like moments to forget for you in terms of like, almost like, work-related horror stories that you've had where you're like, okay, this did not go to plan, like something's gone like very awry.
Or something that I've done, or something that
not necessarily that you've done, but like just that you remember occurring, or something that you've done.
Like most of mine are self-inflicted, 100%. Like I remember we were doing this was in England, not Europe, but like we did one of my biggest commentary blunders. I think I find it more embarrassing than anyone else does, because like you're always your own worst critic.
Yeah, like no one else really notices, but you're like, fuck.
Yeah, but we did this. We were doing What Culture. We did this very ambitious thing. It was like a 64-man tournament called the Pro Wrestling World Cup.
Yeah, I remember.
Which ran throughout the first 8 months of 2017, and there was like a Mexican round, a USA round, there was like different countries, and then like got down to the last 16, and we did like 5 days of shows touring the UK. Finished on a big show in I want to say Manchester, where we're down to the final four, and it was, even now I can't remember who they were. The final was Kushida and Ospreay.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
I can't remember who the other two semi-finalists were.
No, anyway, we'll look it up. We'll put it on the screen here.
More importantly than not remembering it now, like I did, we used to do these, like you do on a lot of shows, do a piece to camera, right? As the commentator at the start from the desk. You go, it's a huge night in Manchester as the 4 semi-finalists are going to compete. We're going to have a winner by the end of tonight. Will it be Will Ospreay, Kushida? I said the third one, I can't remember who it was, and then my brain just froze, and I was like, I couldn't remember who the fourth person was. So I had to like, or will it be? And I had it on notes in front of me, so I kind of went. But it was so obvious. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my god, he's forgotten one of the 4. Like, so you do have moments like that. And I had one with. It's always the high profile matches.
Yeah, it's always the big moment. It's always the moment you can't mess up that you'll mess up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one. One of the biggest What Culture shows I did was this show called True Legacy in 2016, which was headlined by Kurt Angle and Cody Rhodes.
Yeah.
Which was massive, big venue as well, like big ice rink where we had like 2,500 people.
That's mad in itself, isn't it? The fact that like a BritWrest promotion booked that match.
Yeah.
In 2016 as well.
Yeah, but that was our What Culture back in 2016. Bret Hart was there, and Mysterio was there. I mean, it was crazy. We got to the end of this Kurt Angle, Cody Rhodes main event, and I'm just doing this. But I was commentating with Jim Cornette as well, which is cool. He's, I know he's a controversial figure, but Jim's a great.
Controversial, but like no one can deny he's not. He is a legend, but he's
yeah,
very Marmite.
Brilliant mind for the business. Like, I don't think anyone would deny that, or for a certain sort of perspective on the business at least. Anyway, so I'm commentating with him, and I'm doing my sort of big outro, literally 20 seconds till we're going off air, and it's like I'm meant to go, what an unforgettable night here in Manchester. But for some reason I said, what a forgettable night here in Manchester. And I'm like, I heard it back a few weeks. No one said anything. But I know.
That's the thing, isn't it? You can play it off as like sarcasm, like, oh, what a forgettable night. Nothing like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of such a mid-sentence. Oh God, I don't think anyone really, people knew what I meant. But like, it was, but it all gone so well. Like, you just commentated Cody and Kurt, and you're thinking, yeah, I've done all right. And then like, you have a little line like that, and you're like, okay.
It's that moment of like almost like don't lose focus until it's all over. You know what I mean? Like, don't let yourself enjoy it until the job's done.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't. Yeah, I'm exaggerating. So it didn't ruin the night for me. It was a great night.
No, yeah.
but still, it's just one of those. Oh.
Yeah. And you watch it back and you're like, oh, no, I get that. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. Have you ever had any moments like not as like a slip up necessarily, but like any moments in a positive way where you're commentating and you get like too into the match because it's that good and you sort of forget what you're saying or that you need to say stuff?
No.
Okay.
I think...
Because I know you've commentated on a lot of great matches. I was just curious if any of them had like made you like sort of almost like, fuck.
Well, you definitely get emotionally, invested in stuff. Like, to be honest, I've found that I so much prefer like watching a wrestling show that I'm commentating, as I'm commentating it, rather than being a fan in the audience. And I think it's because it's your job to be invested in everything. Like, I always come back from, back to the locker room after a show, and there's been like, maybe there's been 6 matches on the card, and in reality, like 2 were excellent, 2 were decent, 1 was terrible, I don't know, whatever, like, and people, someone says to you, what do you think of my match? And I go, I thought it was brilliant. And I'm not lying, I'm not like blowing smoke. It's like literally because I've just come back from sitting there putting over all these matches as brilliant and putting myself in a mindset where I'm like, putting over the drama and the excitement of everything. I always often overestimate how great something was. I come back on this like adrenaline rush and I'm like, oh my God, that's one of the best shows I've ever done. Like, I was so excited to be ringside to see all that. It was incredible. And then you watch it back and you're like, what's good? But there was like, in hindsight, when you're not caught in the moment, sometimes there's like, you're a bit more realistic in your assessment. But what I will say though is I think that thing you're talking about of commentators getting so caught up that they forget to commentate is like a problem. Like it's sort of it's quite endemic in indie wrestling sometimes, I think, where there's like, you sometimes want to, there's some really good commentators out there, but there's like, sometimes you just want to be like, use your words, like don't just make a noise. Like, you kind of gotta, there is a difference between being like, you're not just a fan who happens to have a microphone, right? You're a commentator who's supposed to be adding something, hopefully, to the viewer's experience. And so, like, you should, ideally, while you want to be emotionally into it, you've still got to remember to say words and to describe what's happening.
In my mind, I love to talk, and like I wouldn't have the quiet problem, but I sometimes have no filter. And I'm like sometimes I will let the emotion get the better of me and just swear consistently. Like if something's a holy shit moment, I'll be like holy shit, and like that's my fear in like not wanting to do stuff. Like I'm like I know that I would get far too like much trouble for my language.
Well, I think it depends as well. Like it's like with swearing, for example, that's an interesting case in point for a commentator, because as long as the promoter is happy for the commentator to be swearing. Then use it like occasional use of a swear word from the otherwise quite buttoned up play-by-play guy can be quite impactful, right? If it's like, he's super professional, he never says a swear word, and then someone leaps off a balcony, you go, oh shit, like, then it's like, oh, okay, wow, that must have been a moment because he even lost his. But it's like, it's planned loss of composure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, as long as you've made an active choice to do that, rather than you've just kind of lost your mind.
Oh no! So for me it would be the losing my mind. Yeah. It's very much that with me. Have you had any like sort of, I don't want to say favourites because that sounds like some of them aren't your favourite, but like have you had any like almost like the Cornette moment, like co-commentators where you're like, oh shit, this is a cool moment. Like how did this happen?
Yeah, I mean. A lot of those What Culture ones, because like I say, they were booking such incredible talent. Cornette. I was there for one of the shows Jim Ross commentated, but obviously he does play-by-play, so if he's at the desk, I'm not, because it's the same job. And unsurprisingly, he outranks me when it comes to that.
Just a little bit, yeah.
So like, but I remember getting to one of these What Culture shows. I think it was the same weekend as that the show with the Cody and Kurt thing. And it was going to be Jim Ross and Jim Cornette and Alex Shane. I think it was like a 3-man booth, and it was like So I thought I had the night off, like, and I was just gonna chill and watch, and I was commentating the next 2 nights that we were doing. But I get there, and one of the production guys goes, like, with the booker, I think it was, goes like, he's like, oh, hi Dave, are you cool to produce the commentators? And I'm like, well, what? So like, no, like, but I ended up doing it. So it's like, I ended up like being the guy in Jim Ross's ear, like telling him, giving him his countdowns and stuff. But I was again, you'd be like, you imagine, right? You're kind of super nervous because it's like the best in your profession. It'd be
like it's like the wrestling equivalent of, again, like almost like being a wrestler, like in Kenny Omega's ear, telling him what to do next in the match.
Yeah. 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 So don't worry, Kenny, I'll call it. Like, it's that sort of thing. And I went up to Jim in the dressing room before, and I was like, yeah, sir. Like, what do you want me to do? And he's like, just give me the countdowns and then stay out of my way, kid. Like, I'm like, all right, cool. So
easy. That's good though. At least that's good. Just easy job.
Oh yeah.
Once you forget.
And to be fair, he also said, if he gets anything wrong, then tell him. Like, and he did. He got like a name pronounced wrong at one point, so I did correct him, and then he corrected himself. But like, apart from that, like, what he didn't want was, someone like just talking in his ear.
I mean, given what he said about past experiences of who he's worked for, I can understand that.
Yeah. I can imagine he's probably been quite heavily produced in at least one of his previous jobs. Let's put it that way. But he was great. He's just, just give him the countdowns, and afterwards, I was just like, I went back and I was like, was that all right? He was like, yeah. Oh god. Like, thanks.
Like, you get into it once, like, you've got to try and zone out almost the fact that, like, who's on the other end of that mic, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and it did make it easier that he literally just wanted me to count backwards from 10 a few times.
Yeah,
like, when we were leading into like a video package.
And then you forget numbers. You're like, shit, how do numbers work?
Yeah, like, to get my own name, like numbers, like, so it was that was something. But yeah, I commentated with, so I produced JR. I never commentated with him. Commentated with Cornette, Stu Bennett, like Wade Barrett, Matt Stryker. So some of these like big names where you're sort of sitting there being like, they were all really cool, like really nice. Last year I did one with Santino.
Yeah.
in at PCW in Poland. That was cool.
That's a very. I mean, in no disrespect, but it's a very random commentary partnership for a Polish indie wrestling promotion.
Yeah, like it was. They had him on. I was on their like second big show. They put a lot of money into production. They're in big arenas, relatively big arenas, like 1,000, 2,000 seats. And he'd been on their previous show as sort of a general manager type role, but not commentator.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd had English commentary on their first show. Then they asked me to do the second one. I was like, cool, who's it with? And I think it was going to be, maybe it was someone else first. It was going to be like Joe Legend or something. And then it ended up, and then that didn't happen. I'm not sure why. And then it was like, oh yeah, so they just casually dropped in like a few days before. They're like, yeah, so it's you and Santino. And I'm like, what?
It's mad, yeah. And again, like, it just shows how the scene has grown out there, right? Because like, if you saw like, if all you knew about a show is that Santino and Dave Bradshaw were commentating, you would automatically assume it's got to be a British show or an American show. There's no way it's anywhere else.
No, but what they did quite well was they mixed in, so they did have some international talent. Like Nick Aldis was there, Chris Masters, I think he's Chris Adonis now, does he go back? Some of like various, and obviously Santino, but then they used some like young Polish guys as well, which was cool. So it's sort of like, getting the rub, as they say, from these big names. It must have been quite a good experience for them as well. Yeah, absolutely.
And like, something going back to what you said previously that I'm curious about, because I sort of, not in wrestling but experienced it myself, is like the no fans doing the commentary at WXW, like doing it in post. And I know you've done a bunch of that in the past, but like, obviously, like, so like, I had a little experience with that again in the past life, but doing it for football instead. And like, I didn't do it for long, but huge respect to you for that, because it's not easy to do commentary on something when you can't, again, get like that vibe of it. You can't be there to feel it.
But you learn how. I mean, it's harder in an empty arena show because my trick for when I'm commentating in post normally is I turn the volume up in my headset so that I have loud crowd noise. So that I have to kind of be shouting pretty loud to feel like I'm being heard, so that it does feel like you're in a noisy place, as opposed to like if you have it on too quiet, even if you think you're commentating at normal volume, there's that natural part of your brain that's kind of self-conscious because you're in a silent room, and so you're like, when you hear it back, you're like, you know, when you hear, sometimes you hear like the commentary that's recorded for video games, like, and it's like, you know, Michael Cole, JR, or whoever it is, Tony Giovanni, like, and it's like, and sometimes, you know, as great as they are, sometimes you're like, this sounds like it was this, you know, these sort of lines that are just being.
Yeah, it doesn't feel natural. It feels like that's what they were doing. Like,
it feels like they were doing it in a vocal booth in a studio sometimes when it's for a video game, like, which I can totally understand why, because if it's literally, you know, right, you're the play-by-play commentator for this video game. Here's a list of lines to reel off. You're not actually watching a match. You're not getting any crowd noise. Like, it's very, very difficult to make it sound like you're somewhere in a loud building surrounded by 20,000 people. So like, but yeah, the key is to like,
turn the sound up, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. The other thing that's difficult is like quite often when I'm doing posts I'm on my own normally. Like, I much prefer a 2-man.
Oh yeah, you feed someone you can feed off and like bounce off for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it's so tough on your own to have to keep that pace going.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was kind of well trained in that, I guess, because I've done. I did quite a lot of post-production stuff, like way before the pandemic, like sort of 2014, 15. First for CMLL, and then for New Japan and AAA. There was like a production company, European production company, that had bought a load of footage off them and was going to distribute it in sort of hour-long episodes into like 30 different English-speaking countries. So they wanted an English commentator, and it was before New Japan had their own English commentary team or whatever. So like, I ended up doing like 80 hours of post stuff, occasionally with a partner, but sometimes on my own. And you know, sometimes, bless it, I love AAA, but like, you know, some of those crazy like 6-person tag team matches, you know, when it's like 3 mini clowns against 3 mini dragons or something, and it's like, you know, my style I think is quite sporting, and someone's like, you know, almost calling something like it's an Olympic event, you know, and it's like, how on earth am I gonna, this match is going 20 minutes, like how am I gonna fill the air while there's a lot of sort of shenanigans and stuff going on? So you sort of learn by necessity like how to sort of fill dead air and be saying something, like, you know, while you're thinking of something actually meaningful to say.
Yeah. Filler comment. Filler text.
Yeah. So I think that like, you know, as much of a slog as some of those, like, you know, so I would record like 5-6 hours of that stuff at a time sometimes, and it can, especially if you're on your own doing that can be like a long session. But actually, in hindsight, it's really helped, because a lot of the European stuff I do in post, it's just not practical to get 2 commentators into the same, you know. We live in different places, so I just do it at my house, like, and so it has to be on my own. And that sort of training from those days, I think, has really helped me, because now I'm not like scared of oh my god, how am I going to fill this 20-minute thing, you know?
No, sure. Before we wrap up, I've got just a couple more things I want to get into. The first is obviously, like, away from the commentary booth, you've sort of stepped foot, I guess in the ring, right, recently. Like, you were a team manager at PEW.
Yes.
You had your own little feud there, which was pretty cool. And like, that's got to be a fairly cool experience as well, having that sort of, I don't want to call it Survivor Series, it's not 5-on-5, but almost like, you know, having that team manager picks his team to go one-on-one. Feel.
It was never really, like, obviously in the later stages it was planned, but like, it was never like, there was never a plan that we were doing this, like, you know, year-long storyline with me and Ryan Taylor, who's the sort of the heel manager guy who I was sort of against. Like, but so Ryan is from in real life, legitimately was on Geordie Shore, reality TV star, big muscly guy. He'll tell you himself he's quite in sort of like into how he looks and all that sort of thing. He's sort of like a sort of a polar opposite to that kind of straight-laced in like play-by-play commentator type persona. So it's like, so I guess it was a natural, and the first couple of times he came to PEW, he wanted to, record some stuff for his TikTok or something, and they ended up letting him sit in on commentary a couple of times, and there was this sort of natural getting at each other. Like, he wanted to be a sort of heel, and I was, so I was having a go at him, and it sort of built this sort of ill will between my commentator character and his manager character, and so it kind of built over time, and he was getting over so well there as a heel manager that it's sort of like it became like a
natural progression to go into that.
Yeah, so eventually we came up with how do we pay this off, and we'll and so we ended up building to, we did last month we did a 3-on-3 elimination match where if he won, because he's been saying, he should be the voice of PEW, he's better than me. Like, so if he won, I would have to resign and leave the company, and he would be the new commentator. But if I won, because he's so obsessed with his looks, that we would shave his head. So
yes. And for anyone who hasn't seen PEW's Instagram, well, for anyone who has, they know the way this has gone. But for those who haven't, we'll put it here now. And nice feeling, I imagon.
Don't put you put my spear on if you want.
Oh, if we can get that, I'll ask him if we can get that. Yeah.
But don't put the strikes I do afterwards, because they are the worst punches in the history of pro wrestling.
That spear must have felt good though.
It was. I wasn't even supposed to do the punches, but it was like we were like I just got a bit carried away in the moment.
Yeah.
I just kind of slid out of the ring. I kind of jumped on him and wanted to start punching him, but I was like I don't know how to punch without.
And in your mind there was the flash of what might have been all those years ago.
Yeah. So I did all. So I think I don't think I did myself particularly proud with the punches, but I think the spear.
I think the spear's enough,
passable.
right? Yeah,
passable.
Absolutely. That's a really cool thing as well. Like, very fun, very fun.
Really fun. Yeah.
No, nice. Well, speaking of matches, we got a closing feature here that we do with all sort of like non-in-ring based talent essentially. And we're going to learn about a few more of your favourite matches now, because this final feature is called The Matches That Made Me. So I'm going to give you a few scenarios, and you let me know which match or moment springs to mind out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is the match that made me a wrestling fan.
First match I ever saw, which was I was around my cousin's house. I was 8 years old. Like, they had Sky at their house and we didn't, and they were watching on a VHS that they'd recorded off Sky Movies previous week of what was UK Rampage '91, and it was. I think in hindsight, I think my first match is a good solid one in terms of the talent who were in it, because it was Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich against Ted DiBiase, $1 Million Man.
That is a good one. That's a good first match.
I mean, the match itself was kind of finished in a DQ or a count out or something, but it was like, DiBiase had Sherry in his corner, so that was my first introduction to a manager. And then we kept watching the show, and then a couple of matches later, I had my first ever tag match, which was the Rockers and the Orient Express. Mm-hmm. So I was like, so in hindsight, I was like, my 8-year-old brain was like, I don't remember ever seeing Big Daddy or any of the World of Sports stuff, because I would have been just about old enough to remember the very last bit of that. I was like 5 or 6 when it got cancelled, but I don't remember any of that. So this, as far as I'm aware, it was the first time I'd ever seen wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was instantly just one of those moments, even when you're 8, where I was
you're like, what the hell is this? Yeah.
What is this? And I've never looked back, really.
No, love it. The next one is the first pay-per-view I remember buying.
You didn't have to buy them. That's the thing.
That's true. The first, let's say Okay, let's say that show aside, the first pay-per-view you remember watching.
Yeah, well, as in, so, you know, because I got into it, so that was the spring, early summer of 91, and so, you know, I spent the summer, because you could get VHSs, right, you know, like the first 7 WrestleManias were all out on video by then, and the SummerSlams and whatever, so I think I'd seen a few of the old pay-per-views by the time summer ended, but the first pay-per-view that I was a fan when it happened was SummerSlam 91, so that was
nice.
So that was Savage, Randy and Liz getting married, and Bret Hart gets perfect, which is good. I always say, by the way, even though, you know, technically not a very good match, but the Ted DiBiase Virgil match for the $1 million belt is wicked.
I think it's a good match, and it's a good story behind it as well. Like,
yeah, because it's a long story. They used, you know, it's one of those things that they used to do really well, where they have like these storylines that ran for like 2 years, like, and Roddy Piper's commentary on it, like, talk about a commentator allowing themselves to get lost in the emotion of the moment. But the way Roddy Piper does that adds so much to it. It's just, then there's a Mountie going to jail, and there's all that kind of stuff. So, yeah,
that's the thing, isn't it? Like, it's really interesting you say that, because, like, in my mind, it is. I think there's, especially nowadays, I think there's so much pressure on, like, the blow-off match being like an instant, like, 5-star classic. Yeah. When it doesn't need to be. It just needs to get the story over, get the job done, like, close it out in a good way. Like, as long as it's not a stinker of a match and the end doesn't ruin everything they've worked for. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the business has changed, obviously, and there's like, there is a certain expectation in terms of work rate, even in, certainly in indies, but even in, you know, in the big leagues like WWE or AEW, like there's a certain expectation that a match has to be of a quality that it maybe didn't have to be in 1991. But yeah, not everything has to be a 5-star indie classic to be good. So.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is the first live event I ever went to.
SummerSlam 92.
Oh, what
Wembley Stadium.
First show.
Yeah, I was on the pitch as well. I don't know how my dad pulled it off, but like we were like 25 rows back. And I've later found, because you know, everyone talks about Bulldog and Hitman, which obviously was awesome. And I was super excited when Bulldog won, but like I was a massive Ultimate Warrior fan.
Yeah.
Back then. And so I had my Ultimate Warrior sign and everything, and like he was challenging for the World Championship, and it was like when they announced that not only SummerSlam was coming to Wembley, but Ultimate Warrior was challenging for the World Championship. I was like, oh my god, we have to go. And then like we did go, and obviously he didn't. It was a count out, whatever, in the end. But what I only found this out 3 or 4 years ago. But the original plan was Warrior was going to turn heel.
Oh.
And join Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect.
I didn't know that.
Like, and you know, he was going to win the title, but turn heel in the process of doing it. And apparently, he, in the end, Warrior himself vetoed it because he didn't want to lose the merchandise sales of being
of being one of the top faces. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god, that would have broken my little heart if he turned heel. Like,
it's mad that you say SummerSlam though, because in my mind I'm like, oh, wrestling, like a stadium show as your first show is crazy. But then like I think about it now, I'm like, shit, there were probably like some kids at All In at Wembley who that was their first wrestling show. Oh, and that's got to be cool as hell.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, you know, 25 years later, or however long it was, you know, 25, 15, 16 years later when I got into the industry, you know, you start talking, talk to a lot of people in British wrestling who now work in it as wrestlers or commentators or whatever, like, who are of that age, so sort of late 30s to mid 40s kind of thing now, and like so many of us were in that stadium that day.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
That is crazy.
Because it's obviously something that's really, I consider it one of the big nights of my childhood. You know, and I think there's a lot of us who are similarly inspired.
No, for sure, and like. Again, about like just sticking on, we don't normally talk like AEW and stuff on here, but like the thing, again, the matches were great. It was an incredible occasion, but the thing that popped me the most was all the BritWres stars who cameoed on it. Like as being a more indie fan myself than a AEW or WWE fan, like on the screen, like in the pre-show on the contract signing between Miro and Hobbs, like seeing like Oku and Doris and like all those up there. And like the women who were part of MJF's entrance and Grado coming out, like I was like, holy shit! Like, and Tony Storm as well. Tony Storm being in a match and Aussie Open, like all these people who have come through BritWres and become stars, like not thanks to BritWres, but were stars in BritWres before ever going anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, holy fuck, like, that's crazy cool.
Yeah, but that's yeah, it was almost not weird to me now, because it's like we've almost become used to it, because so many of the guys who have been big in, in the UK scene in my time have since gone on to WWE, or, at least to NXT UK, but many of them onto the main roster. Like, is it the first few times when that happens to you, where it's someone is weird.
And you're like, I saw them wrestle in front of like 60 people, 100 people.
Yeah. It's like, I've been for a Chinese takeaway with that guy. It's like, whatever, like those kind of things. And then like, but it gets to a point, it's happened so often now, which is great, that it's almost stopped being weird, which is incredible.
Yeah.
It's just, but again, it's another measure of the success of our scene.
For sure. The next one was my favourite piece of wrestling merch. Like, that you ever owned, not like that you've had, like, not had, but like...
I, at SummerSlam 92, even though I was supporting the Bulldog in the match, I got the Bret Hart wraparound sunglasses.
How could you? It's a cooler design. Bret always had the better design.
Yeah. I was a Bret Hart fan. Like, it's just, you just couldn't cheer him over Bulldog, right?
Yeah. Actually, that's the thing, like, is so weird. Like, and I know Bulldog was, like, one of the top guys and, like, a face a lot and, like, stuff, but... It's really weird, because I didn't realise until late on, especially in my wrestling fandom, that you had to cheer the hometown person. Like, for so long, I booed William Regal. And, like, then we came to, I came to, like, a few shows where he was on, like, in the UK, and he was getting so many cheers, and I was like, why are they cheering William Regal?
Why cheer Regal? Yeah. Like, yeah. No. Yeah, we're quite...
No, you always cheer the hometown hero. Always cheer.
Yeah.
The next one was my first ever favourite wrestler.
Ooh. Probably Warrior.
Yeah?
I don't remember, because he wasn't on that UK Rampage show. That was the first one I ever saw. I don't remember coming out of that being like, this guy's the best, of any of those guys who were on it particularly. But by the time SummerSlam 91 had rolled around, by then I would have seen, for example, I would have watched WrestleMania 6 with Hogan against Warrior, where Warrior beats him, and WrestleMania 7, that retirement match with Warrior and Savage. So I think by then I was, my first, I was definitely a Warrior guy, not a Hogan guy.
Yeah. Who's your favourite wrestler now?
Now I'm like, it should have been a Savage guy.
Yeah, you look back at it, don't you? Though those were the two top, and you're like, how was Randy not the top guy?
Yeah. So now it's like, I always say the first wrestling show I ever went to, in Wembley Stadium, and I booed Randy Savage and Bret Hart. I mean, it's embarrassing.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Who's your favourite wrestler now? That's not part of it. I'm just curious now. Who is like the one at the moment that you look at and you're like, yeah, they're the best?
Well, worldwide.
Yeah.
Probably Roman.
Yeah.
I just think he's got to be the best main event heel that they've had, not just for longevity, but just like for a long time. I thought like Triple H in 2000 when he was first the main event heel, the stuff with Cactus Jack and all that. I was like, that's the level, that's the pinnacle of main event heeldom. But I think you'd have to say Roman has overtaken that now.
Yeah.
And he's just so good. Like, I was lucky enough to be at Money in the Bank this year, and like, man, that match, unbelievable. Like, and actually, you felt like it's quite rare when you sort of been around the business as a fan or as a commentator for long enough to be a bit jaded or whatever, and it's like to still get that kind of thing where you're like, oh, this is like I've seen a moment in what will be considered history, because Roman Reigns' current title reign obviously will be talked about for decades to come. And like, I was there the night he got pinned for the first time in like 3 years, and that the fact that you, even at 40 years old, they've managed to do it in a way that makes you feel that that's a moment.
Oh, there's been so few, I think, top tier storylines in like both AEW and WWE in like the past few years, but like that, the Bloodline storyline and the MJF Adam Cole storyline, I think are two of the best storylines I've seen in probably like a decade.
Yeah.
I think they're both incredible.
Yeah. I mean, MJF would be, I like Adam Cole as well, but like MJF especially would be another one who you'd have to
Yeah.
but up there in the top 3 or 4 in the world at the moment, I think.
Yeah. Sat through that entire match at All In. I was sure one of them was going to turn. I was sure the turn was happening. I didn't know who, but I was like, "It's definitely going to happen."
I remember saying to someone prior to, like, I watch AEW, but not sort of all the time. I remember saying, like, does it feel a bit, no disrespect to those two guys, but does it feel a bit small as a match to be main eventing, because there's such big names who you could put in that main event spot, but for them to have that much sort of confidence in the story they were telling with those two, to have them be the ones to close the show, I thought was a gutsy move. But halfway through the main event, I turned to I was with James R. Kennedy, who I used to say What Culture with. Not that we're friends.
No, of course not.
And I said, yeah, man, this was the right call.
Yeah.
It was like so good.
The emotion in it as well, like the pop for the hug and everything was just great. So well done. The next one gets onto your career because it's the first match I commentated on.
Live because my audition one was that I did when I've had the audition for IPW. I remember was Martin Stone against the Great Muta.
Let's say not as audition.
That was from a couple of years previously when they'd had Great Muta been brought over, but that wasn't in person. My first, it was John Ryan, who was a big name in Hammerlock, Kent, and Tony Sefton, who was you guys. Yeah, so that was my first.
How did it go?
I don't think I have like a DVD of it or anything. So I got invited back. So
it must have gone well. Yeah.
It can't have been too terrible, but I still know Tony. I think I'm probably still Facebook friends with John, but Tony, I'm definitely still friends with. I tell him sometimes, that he was my first ever commentary gig. Do
you remember the moment before you started, what you the emotion behind it, what you were feeling?
I remember being backstage with Dean Ayers, because Dean was my co-commentator that night, and I remember Dean saying, "Right, you've got to go and shake everyone's hand," and me thinking it was a rib. This is one of those pranks that wrestlers pull on each other, right? No, we all shake each other's hands at the beginning and at the end. And I was, really? So I went and did it. But I remember being, you're sort of nervous because you're in this, you don't know who's friends with who. Are they going to be annoyed that someone's entered their world? It's everyone's.
No, knowing Dean as well, I can see why you thought it might be a rib as well, because that's exactly the sort of thing he'd do before you start, proper stitch you up.
Yeah, well, sort of, but he'd only do that. He wouldn't. Dean wouldn't do it to be mean.
Oh no, he wouldn't. He'd never do it to be mean. No, not at all. He'd always do it in the fun of it. But again, once you've started, that's such a safe pair of hands to have your first show with.
Oh, he was he completely took me under his wing. He couldn't have had a better mentor in those early days. Yeah.
Love it. Shout out Dean. Love Dean. Great job. The next one is the match I'm most proud of commentating on.
Ooh. I think there's a lot. It's hard. It's really hard to pick. But some of the ones we talked about with some of those big projects with What Culture, the World Cup thing, that 64-man thing. Even I botched the intro to the final, but or the Cody Angle thing or things like that. But then we did one there was just some real gems that we forget about from that era. There was the Ricochet Keith Lee match, which was so good, and this was at a time when I think that was in that World Cup. It was in 2017.
Yeah, I vaguely remember it. I know the match, but I can't recall much of it. But now that you say it, I know it.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long after that famous Ospreay Ricochet match, where I can't remember what promotion that was in, but where it was where there was, which was controversial.
Where it went mega viral because it was so flippy.
Yeah, and some people loved it, some people hated it, and the sort of more traditionalists was kind of saying, "Oh, these guys they're basically just choreographed break dancers. They're not they're not proper wrestlers kind of thing.
Yeah.
They couldn't tell a story. Like, and I was like, I mean, I knew that was nonsense anyway, but like, when you see Ricochet doing his underdog thing against the massive Keith Lee, like in that match in What Culture, you're like, that was the moment for me with Ricochet where I was like, oh, this guy's one of the best storytellers in the industry.
Yeah.
Like, and Will's great at telling stories. So it's like,
it's weird, isn't it? Because like it's weird how wrestling works in the fact that match was so split, so Marmite, and yet although both of them were great and like good enough names at that point, I think that's the match that made them both megastars. Like, even though it split the audience so much.
Well, it's the match that gave them name recognition. But I guess the point I'm making, I guess, is that it would only get you so far. If you couldn't do the other stuff, like if you couldn't actually tell a story, because that's what wrestling ultimately is storytelling. Like, if you weren't able to play a role and tell that physical story over the course of a 20-minute match, then you would go viral on the internet for a few weeks, but then your star would quickly burn out. But like in those guys' cases, like and for me with Ricochet, it was that moment where I was like, oh no, this guy's real deal. Like, and so just when you get moments like that where you're just like, oh, I'm watching something really world class, and I get to sit at ringside and do it, and that's by far not the only one of those moments I've had, but just as an example of one of those where you're like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, for sure. The next one's on the flip side, because it's the match I wish I'd commentated on.
Oh, the Mr. Blobby Rumble.
Yes, of course, the 90s Rumble at Riot Cabaret.
Yeah. Oh, it haunts my dreams. That was, and I hadn't had, this was this year. It was February this year. And so 2023. So I'd lasted almost 3 full years without catching COVID.
That's impressive.
And I was starting to get cocky. You know what I mean? I was starting to be like, oh yeah, I just can't catch it. Like, I'm invincible. And the day I get it is the day I could have met Mr. Blobby.
That is heartbreaking.
It is.
3 years impressive though. Big up that. I was getting cocky as well. I was like 2 years and like 3 months. And I was like, oh, look at me, 2 years in, no COVID. And then I got it and I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah. One of my best mates is still like, because he's now, 3.5 years in, and he's like, oh, I still haven't had it.
That's insane. That's mad.
He's like, I can't get it, I'm invincible. I'm like, that's what I was saying until February.
Nah, he must have had it. He must have had something, he just assumed it was a cold. He must have had it. Yeah. The next one is the match. I don't necessarily call it favourite match, because it's the match I go back to the most.
Ooh. Well, just...
Like it's essentially in your mind like the most rewatchable match, the match that you'd always go back to watch, like, and not get tired of, essentially.
Oh, probably Bret and Owen at WrestleMania 10.
No, yeah, that's such a good match. I feel like it's like one of the best matches ever, and yet it's still underrated. Like, people still don't appreciate that it's even better than that.
Yeah, it annoys me that people talk about Shawn and Razor's ladder match being the best thing at WrestleMania 10.
No, it's Bret Owen.
As good as that was, I'm like, no, that's Bret and Owen's show. Like,
it was the better storyline, and it was the better match. There's no.
I mean, I get it, because at the time, actually, to be fair, thinking about it, I would have been 11 years old at the time, and I'd never seen most of us hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I think it's it's like an age thing. It's like a generational thing, right? Isn't it? Like the more experienced, older wrestling fans who have sort of seen it all will look at Bret Owen.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, though, a ladder match is cool as shit.
I would imagine, I can't remember, but I would imagine when I was 11, the thing that I was talking about in the playground the next day was the ladder match, not Bret v. Owen.
No.
But looking back at it now, I'm like, what do you want to watch? I want to watch Bret Owen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one is someone comes up to you and asks, what's wrestling? What do you show them?
So I have to show them something to explain.
Yes, yeah. It can be like a match, or almost like maybe like a feud, or like I think I can't remember who we had, but someone said like the Austin Rock promo from 17.
Oh yeah.
So something like it can be anything like along those lines, but something that you show someone to be like, this is what pro wrestling is.
Ooh. Well, recently you could pick quite a lot of Bloodline stuff. I think. my favorite early stuff is like my favorite like emotional moment from my early WWF fandom is WrestleMania 7 where Elizabeth saves Brandy after the retirement match and everyone in the audience is crying. Attitude Era, I'd probably say like something like, Backlash 2000, which is what WrestleMania should have been, where The Rock at the peak of his babyface popularity finally beats the McMahon-Helmsley regime with help from Stone Cold, and the place goes wild, and it's like the happy ending that everyone wanted a month earlier at Mania. That still gives when the glass breaks because they're beating up Rock, referees knocked down, and match is still ongoing, and the McMahons and Triple H, they think they've got him again, and then like the glass breaks and Stone Cold appears for the first time in 6 months or something because he's been off injured, and it still gives me like goosebumps.
Yeah, that moment was cool. When you say the Austin one as well, the one that sticks in my mind in terms of like a pure pop that I'd show someone is Foley winning the title, and but not the pin, the pop when Austin comes out and the crowd loses its shit is like still one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen in wrestling.
Yeah, another one would be just in terms of pops and moments. Like I would say Edge's return at the Royal Rumble.
Yeah, that was special
in 2020. It was just because that I think that might be the best facial expression in the history of wrestling. Just the authenticity of that moment where he just comes through the smoke and he's just like, and you're just like, okay.
No, the best facial expression is the viral guy, right? The one who after Taker lost the streak.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the best, like the pure disbelief.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So second place. Yeah.
Love it. No, well, that brings us nicely to the end of the chat. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. It's been a pleasure having you here. Like, genuinely, been such a fan of your work for so long. It's lovely having you on. I hope you enjoyed it.
It's been fun. Yeah, always happy to chat some wrestling.
It's always nice, isn't it? It's always nice. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And that brings us to the end of our chat. And one last segment that we have, which is a new tradition on the show, where our last guest leaves a question for our next guest.
Okay.
And so these aren't wrestling related. Some of them are. These aren't always wrestling related. But this is, I would say, half wrestling related, because obviously you do a lot of traveling in your job. And so the question you have been left is...
Who left this, by the way?
Oh, I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Oh, you're not allowed to say?
I'm not. No, that's part of the thing. I don't know why that's part of the thing, but that's part of the thing.
Presumably, I could just look back at the last episode and find out.
Yes, but I don't always film in order.
Okay.
So there is that spanner, but you could potentially and try and guess who it was from that.
Okay.
The question you've been left is, what's your favourite go-to travel snack or food for the road?
Oh, not so much food, but drink. I would say most of British wrestling, including me, is fueled on the white Monster Ultra.
Yes, we've heard that a lot in terms of favourite.
And only that.
Yeah.
I don't want any other flavour of Monster. There's that weird mango flavour one that's tastes more mango-y than a mango. And you're just I like mangoes. But I don't it's too much.
Yeah.
So I'm very particular with what Monster I want.
But, energy drinks from I would have assumed it, I think, before we started this podcast. But having started the podcast, the thing I've learned more than anything is that BritRest makes up 80% of energy drink sales in the country.
100%. Yeah.
Just absolutely fuels the industry.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. If energy drinks were banned in this country, that the scene survived a pandemic. I don't know if it would survive the end of energy drinks.
That would be too far. That's too far.
Too far. But yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, we always leave our guests with a final bit of promo time. So anywhere that you commentate that you think people should come and check out, or if they can catch you anywhere on demand services and stuff, give us your final sort of hype promo of why people should be coming and checking out the work of Dave Bradshaw.
I can tell you where you can see me nowadays. So I'm in the UK. I do Riot Cabaret. I do Pro Wrestling Chaos, which is doing great things down in Bristol. I do DEW, who we talked about. They're in Stratford-upon-Avon, and NGW in Hull. So those are all ones I do here. And then in across Europe, I do WXW in Germany. I do GWF, which is based in Berlin. In Belgium, I do Bodyzoy. Hungary, I do Passion Pro. God, who I forgot? PTW I've been doing in Poland. And I'm about to start with Pro Wrestling Austria as
nice.
well. So
busy.
Lots of places.
Very busy.
Yeah, it's great.
Love it. Love it. Brilliant. Dave, thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.